Yo, what's up, Tyler?
What's up? Looking outside. Looks like it's about to storm and softball's going to be canceled, but just got done. Well, I guess we're about to record a podcast.
Well, we are about
right?
to record a podcast, yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's the way it works, even though we're
Don't
recording this
tell
after
people the secret. This is...
All right. Well, I mean, they have to know, though, because we talk about what we're going to talk about. So,
very true. Very true. Here I am trying to hide something that I'm
right?
in plain sight holding in my hand. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. So a couple of weeks ago, you told me we were going to have Slash on the podcast. I was like, who the heck is Slash?
Not the musician.
And didn't realize. Yeah.
Well, not that
I mean,
musician.
I was just like, yeah. And then I'm like, this dude's going to get on his name. He's going to be going by the name Slash. And I was like, what the heck? And obviously, that's not the case. Well, we had Slash Creative.
Well, yeah, they are a design agency. And so Drew Reilley, he is one of the co-founders of Slash, and they're a creative agency, but they are who helped create the NS Builders brand. From a visual standpoint, they've helped with copy, they've helped with just what the brand has evolved into today. They've also worked with, I think, a couple of you guys that listen, but as well as the Modern Craftsman. They were there early on. The Modern Craftsman logo is actually hand drawn. It's completely custom. We know that because there was a flooring brand that tried to borrow it for their own use years ago,
or stole it
and still use it. But today's podcast, I wanted to talk about the craftsmanship in design. And how that can, be outside of our industry, but you're going to hear that there's a lot of similarities between what Drew has went through from starting a business to, owning a business and understanding how to be successful at that business. But at the core of it, designing cool stuff with cool people. And he caught me off guard in the beginning. He is a way more legitimate musician than I thought he was.
Yeah. I feel like we could have an entire podcast just on the music side of things, but that would have been kind of shitty to not talk about his business.
Hey,
at all.
Tell me about the point in your career where you were just a maniac and wanted to stop.
Yeah. But super interesting guy. Very intelligent, good conversation. There's so many crossovers between what he does, what designers do, graphic designers, and what we do, and many different art forms, which is it's neat to hear, and it just like I don't know, it kind of reaffirms everything that I feel about what we're doing and what they're doing, and how important kind of not only the product but the process is. For us, but yeah, it was a really good conversation. I enjoyed it. I was one of those ones where I just like kind of want to sit back and listen to what he has to say.
Drew, appreciate you coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
I feel like we have so many podcasts, I mean, obviously, that are so building related, and we've had so many conversations about let's split into other cool shit. And well, I'm going to start off by saying I'm just glad I get to spend more than 30 minutes on a call with you, and I'm not like running to a meeting.
Right.
But you've been part of my business, I think, since like year 2.
Yeah.
And maybe even sooner than that. And then obviously partnered with us on the Modern Craftsman. But just having a conversation that has a different side to it, different, there's so much craftsmanship in what you do, and for reference point, and I want to dig into literally everything that we've ever talked about. But even when we go through like a design meeting, we sit down and like you talk about moving font. You're helping me put together a proposal document, and you're moving font. You're like, you know what I want? I don't want this shit to line up with anything. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, man, that's gonna hurt me. Like I want it to line up with something. Like I want it to snap to a grid. and you're putting it together, and I'm like, okay, I get it. Like there's intention behind what you do.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Let's just start. Who are you? What do you do? Let's get into it.
Well, I want to comment on what you just mentioned about alignment. I think there's, especially in print layout, like you have to align certain things because you have to think about the person reading it more than like yourself as an artist and like wanting to like just do something cool for the sake of doing something cool. But there are times like on cover pages, at least, right, where David Carson's a famous graphic designer, and the graphic design community either like loves or hates him because his stuff is just like chaos, right? But he has this quote that there's so much really good, slick, forgettable design in the world that it takes those of us who are willing to do something a little wild to actually create something that's memorable, right? But yeah, I'm Drew Reilley. I'm the co-founder and creative director of Slash. We're a bunch of like fancy agency jargon buzzwords, and then we do design and branding.
You guys say you're fancy, but you guys are some badass motherfuckers.
I appreciate it.
Well, you also play music, right?
Yeah. So I had a full scholarship to LSU when I was 18, and then I dropped out when I was 19 to live in a van with 5 other dudes and travel around the country. And by the time I was 22, I was signed to Universal Records and I was playing 285 shows a year. I did that for 4 years and just got burnt out, man. The music industry is rough. Like 1% of musicians in the world get signed, and then 1% of those people actually get a career that has longevity.
So I had no idea.
That's a lot of shows in a year.
That's
Dude,
a lot of shows.
Rough. I was in much better shape physically. Mentally, I was in probably the worst shape of my life.
What kind of music did you play?
I wrote rock and roll music. I had a band of a bunch of dudes that were from like, when they talk about like the Bayou in Louisiana, they're from the Bayou, like Donaldsonville, White Castle, New Orleans. And we didn't really like stick to a specific genre. We just wrote what sounded cool to us. And I think that was like the allure to our band, was like, we weren't ever trying to be cool. We were just cool. And I transpose a lot that I learned from like building a brand. Like it takes some hustle to take 4 dumbass dudes from the Bayou in Louisiana and work hard enough to get noticed by the music industry and eventually like get a record deal. And we had a pretty killer record deal, right? So all of that to me, there's the product, which is the music, you know, but everything else, like the music's 10%. There's marketing, there's creating a brand, there's, you know, everything else that you have to do that's you have to consider. But I try to transpose everything that I learned, and especially all the mistakes that I made in that journey, and inform everything that I do in this new like creative agency world space by that. So it's like, by design, we're a little punk rock, right? So it's kind of like, how do we be an anti-agency but still be successfsay and create value for brands?
Well, I want to dig into the music thing a little bit.
Yeah.
You say you were in the best shape of your life, playing 285 shows a year, not great mentally. What, you know, being in that, call it that 1%, you're signed, you're a record deal, you get 285 shows. What was that life like? Like behind just playing music, you say playing music's 10%. What was your life really like?
You spend a lot of time in a vehicle, especially when you're touring, so we weren't part of the 1% that actually has a career that creates longevity. We were part of the 1% that got signed, but we were not part of the 1%.
What does signed mean? What does that mean for the general?
So you get a record contract from a label, and a label is essentially like a bank and a Rolodex. And we had the last deal at Universal with a subsidiary that was not a 360 deal. 360 deals were created by like the dinosaurs running the music agency, as their attempt to like maintain some sort of control over like the crashing and burning that was and still is like the music industry from that perspective. Like when you think about iTunes, Spotify, streaming music and everything else, it completely transformed the music industry. But not just how consumers consume music, but also the infrastructure and logistics behind it. So we fought very hard to not have a 360 deal, because a 360 deal means that the label runs out every piece of your business. So they are assigning you a manager. They are, you know, they're booking your shows. They're doing your PR. They're doing your merchandising. They're doing this, and this, which I feel like is a total conflict of interest, right? We pushed against that and ended up having like a really killer boutique booking agent. And our manager that was with us from day one, we ended up having to get a co-manager who was Linkin Park's manager. And he really only showed up when like we needed muscle, but he was always like a champion of the band. And if we wanted to push for something, for example, like we don't want this song to be the first track on the album, he'd come in, walk into the door, like into the room and be like, hey, they're not putting that song as the first track on the album. And they'd be like, okay, our bad, you know? And then he'd roll out and get a check.
I want that job.
No, dude. Rick Rubin is a legendary producer, and he's one of the most inspirational people to me in the world. But the dude, like back then in like 2007, was making $1 million a record to produce a record, and he maybe spent 2 hours in the studio. Nuts.
Wait, is Rick Rubin the guy that was on that singing show? What the hell was it? Was it American Idol?
No, that's
No.
Ruben stuttered.
Oh.
Something like that. Not even
Rick
close.
Rubin looks like what I would look
everyone
like.
just got so mad at me. I can tell.
I'm not mad at all, dude. No, Rick
I gotta
Rubin,
look him
like he looks like what I'll look like in like 15 years if I didn't shave or like do anything else ever. He wears like
that's very different
sweatpants
than Ruben started.
and no socks or shoes ever. He's very zen. But like this dude was a full-time law student at whatever the big school is in New York, and at the same time was like making Def Jam records from his dorm room.
It's amazing.
And then was headlining Madison Square Garden as the Beastie Boys DJ while in school, and he like 19 years old, dude.
What?
Like if you ever like pull up his Wikipedia, Rick Rubin, and look at the discography.
I was just for some reason he just came up on my Instagram reels. Like I don't even know what it was. It was him just speaking incoherently.
Yeah.
Looking homeless.
I've seen this guy before. Okay.
He's incredible, man. There's a 4-part documentary on, I think it's Amazon, called Shangri-La, which is the studio that he works out of in Malibu, and it was probably one of the most inspiring like pieces of filmography I've seen in 10 years, man.
So
Estimated net worth of $250 million.
Yeah.
Do most bands that kind of end up going mainstream end up kind of signing the 360 deal and just letting somebody market them?
These days, yes.
Yeah.
But it's also why you have less albums that are all killer, and it's more like singles.
Yeah.
Right? Because that entire infrastructure supports like one-hit wonders.
Yeah.
Right? It's these guys are hot right now. How much can I milk this for until it's totally dry and then move on to the next person? Whereas back in the day, there were developmental deals. And we passed up a developmental deal, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I say regret it. I think everything happens for a reason. You make all the decisions you make, and it's like it's just part of your story. It's seasonal, right? But developmental deals would have been, so for example, Atlantic Records had a subsidiary, and they were a fresh new subsidiary, and they were offering us $30,000 to a budget to record a record, and then they put us on tour. And if we sold 10,000 albums, within the lifespan of that record, which is undetermined, then they'd move us up to the next like subsidiary label, and our budget would be a little bit higher, and you work up and work up and work up. But the entire time you're doing that, you're working with their team. They're developing you as an artist. They're helping you grow. They're facilitating whatever needs you would have to like just really make music and not have to have a day job. Whereas we took the Universal deal, which was like, we're going to give each one of you guys a $10,000 signing bonus, and we have $1 million budget to produce your record. So Howard Benson produced our record and Chris Lord-Alge mixed it. Both of those dudes are Grammy award-winning producers and mixers. And the album never got released, and it's incredible. We actually released it this year illegally. Because at this point, it's
where can they find it?
It's on Spotify now.
Spotify. What's it? Yeah. What's the band?
The band's called Merriweather, Meriwether, Merriweather Lewis of Lewis and Clark. He was my great grandfather.
Sick.
And the album's called Sons of Our Fathers. It's I'm incredibly proud of it. It sounds insane. It's a killer album, but the deal that we turned down from Atlantic, the developmental deal, they were signing 3 bands to that deal. They had 2 bands that had already signed it, and we were the third that they had offered. The other 2 bands were Shinedown and Paramore. So like that shows you like the development and time that they put in that band versus us, who like they were trying to put us on MTV shows and just anything that they could to like do this one hit wonder kind of in and out type of thing. So
what year was this?
2004 was when we started touring. We signed in 2007, and the band broke up in 2011.
Yeah, the music industry is a beast. I've listened to a couple podcasts on it, and then my wife ended up being a friend of ours. My wife worked with the wife of the lead singer from the band The Wonder Years, who is like an older punk band and still touring and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But he has like multiple, he does a bunch of solo stuff.
Yep.
And it's just a hustle, like all the time. And like as far as longevity goes in punk rock, that they've done a good job because you're perpetually singing to like an adolescent crowd. So you can really only ride that out for so long, and they've done a good job. But it's still like, if you want to remain true to your roots and not sell out and not go completely mainstream, like it's a means to an end. But it's so tough in that industry.
This podcast is brought to you by Duration Molding and Millwork. If you head over to their website, durationmillwork.com, and click on sidings, you're going to see that they are the only manufacturer of beveled siding in the true exterior product. And when I say beveled siding, clapboard siding that bevels from, say half inch down to a thinner profile on the other end, where more traditional quote unquote composite sidings or maybe fiber cement sidings are going to be a consistent one thickness, which doesn't give you that authentic lap siding. They also just recently came out with a starter strip, which I think makes entirely or a ton of sense, because frankly it's something that you got to rip on site, and then what do you do with that leftover piece?
The whole beveled versus like a single thickness of siding makes all the difference for me, especially when you're making a product that's supposed to be replicating wood or traditional products, and seeing that detail for me is like, okay, I mean, it makes all the difference in the world. If you're detail oriented and you want a product that looks like the real thing, has better wear characteristics, obviously rot resistant, all of that stuff, it's not going to expand and contract. That's definitely what you should be going for. But for me, it's not even a comparison between the two. I love seeing the actual bevel.
To learn more, durationmillwork.com. Make sure you follow them on Instagram. This podcast is brought to you by Reno Run. So they are in Montreal, Toronto, Boston, Chicago, Philly, and DC, and they're building materials exactly when you need them. They handle everything from if you need a last-minute box of screws to oversized orders. They're even helping with some of the takeoffs, big, large, extra large. They're completely equipped to deliver any size order.
Yeah, we were talking about this last week, Nick and myself, and we were saying, it's amazing the turnaround that they're able to get delivering these goods to us on short notice. It's amazing, but also just the convenience of being able to get everything from one place. To me, it wouldn't matter if it came in a day, 2 days, 3 days. It's so convenient to be able to go on and order everything that you need. It's coming from one place and not having to jump around. Obviously, their turnaround time is good, but just something to note where it's so convenient to be using a service like Reno.
Totally, and like you said, having one spot ordering everything. And if you guys want free delivery, head over to podcast.renorun.com/Modern Craftsman. This podcast is brought to you by Rockwool, high-performance, fire-resistant, soundproof stone wool insulation for your interior and your exterior walls. Not only helping you overachieve local codes and building standards, but getting ahead of future codes. So we actually had a technical call with Rockwool this week because we were talking about we have some tight roof lines that traditional bat insulation aren't going to be able to, we're not going to be able to achieve our R value. So we wanted to get them on the line of understanding, hey, what creative ways can we work through this? And they're looking at our entire envelope and understanding, what type of ventilation we need and how we can achieve the R value and mainly the R value that we need in a more traditionally built home compared to our Rhode Island project. And they were able to walk through and come up with valid solutions, to some of those trouble areas.
Yeah, I mean, new construction obviously is one thing where you can plan for that if you're using traditional insulation methods and have a cavity large enough to reach those new R values that they're requiring. But a renovation, a remodel, a lot of times it's like put whatever you can fit in there, but they'll help you kind of determine better solutions for that than just, hey, whatever fits in the cavity, run with that. So it's definitely a good service to have.
Yeah, and being part of their partnership program, which is called the R-Class program, that's going to be for builders and remodelers who demand more. It's a community for those who take great pride in their craft and always looking to learn about better materials and installation techniques. And if you want to learn more about that, head over to rockwool.com/rclass. This podcast is also brought to you by Upstate Merch, a quality-focused screen printing, embroidery, and graphic design shop located in Whitney Point, New York. And for over 12 years, Upstate Merch prides themselves on using only the best materials and American-made tools to get your job done. And with their highly trained staff and graphic design team, they will walk you through the process and find the right garment and printing style for your needs.
I gotta get some shirts made. I had randomly somebody, I guess, had an Etsy store set up from a while ago where somebody just like 2 weeks ago ordered shirts, and Rachel's like, I have to fill a shirt order for you. But they also did, for the Enduro Club that I'm a member of, they did some shirts recently on pretty tight time constraints and helped sort out the design and everything else, and then got them shipped to me. I dropped them off just in time for the event, which was super helpful for me. So it's not just construction shirts, design, whatever you guys need, they'll be able to help you
they're
out.
actually printing our Materia polos right now, and I'm about to send them another sweatshirt order for some more casual sweatshirts I want printed with our logo on it. And if you guys want 10% off your first order, make sure you mention the Modern Craftsman podcast when you email them, print@upstatemerch.com. You can also find them on the web at upstatemerch.com.
Yeah, it's definitely a grind. And when you're 22 years old and you're kind of an idiot and someone's just like dangling a check in front of you and you're not thinking about like who owns your publishing, who's getting royalties on what, do you get 100% of profit from merchandising, who's printing your merch, who's marketing that shit, who's making your website, who's designing your album covers.
So what they had a $10,000 signing bonus, $1 million to produce your record. I'm assuming in that $1 million is the check that they're getting you to work, right? So what are you making a year at being
Nothing.
an artist? Nothing.
You get that
Like, just
$10,000, and then they bought us a van that we used to tour with. We
kind of
had
van?
like a 15 passenger, not a cool, like Sprinter vans weren't around just yet, but there was a bunch of horror stories when Sprinter vans started to come around of like bands tipping them over because you're like pulling this big trailer, and you know, unless you're one of my guys from Donaldsonville or White Castle who could literally parallel park on like Broadway in New York City, because they've been driving tractors since they were 8. Like most of those band kids don't know how to drive like a big ass rig like that, you know?
Sure.
But so got a van. We had budget for like hotel rooms and gas, basically anything to keep us on the road. And when we weren't on the road, they paid for an apartment for us to live in. Outside of that, there was no like money being given to us.
So basically, hey, we'll make sure that you're alive and have somewhere to eat and sleep.
Right.
But that's it.
And so
and otherwise you work.
Yeah. So that grind that Tyler was talking about, we were for 4 years generally first or second of like 4 bands in a bill. So you'd have your headliner and either your co-headliner or your main support, and then like secondary support, maybe us, and then us, right? Which also means that even on some of the largest stages, after the headliner has set up their gear and sound checked, and then support sets up their gear and sound checked, and then maybe we're next, and if not, we're after that. One, you got 5 minutes to sound check before doors open. Most of the time, you're sound checking as doors are open, and as soon as you're done sound checking, you have to start playing. But you also have about 3 feet of like depth.
Right.
And we were nuts. Like we were pretty much drunk the entire time. There were bands that like managers would pull them off of tour with us and be like, those guys can't hang with those other guys anymore. You know, there's some pretty insane stories like this. We played at CBGB's in New York before we were signed, and that night was like one of the longest, most epic nights of my entire life, but also like the reason why I have not had a drink in 5 years. But it's like you play, you set up, you play the show, you go behind the merch table. You cannot sell your merch for more than the headlining band sells their merch for. So if Papa Roach is selling t-shirts for $45, Merriweather, who no one's ever heard of, is also selling their shitty ass shirts for $45, right? So the only way that I can compete with that is make my shirts look better. So I learned how to make shirts, you know? While all my dudes were on the beach and hanging out and shit like that in Los Angeles, I was in a hotel room just designing for like 5 hours one day. And the whole band comes back and they're all like hammered and like, hey, here's some t-shirt designs. What do you guys think? And I'll never forget this. My guitar player, like this dude was born with like a VH1 behind the music about him. Like he's just the most out there rock and roll dude ever. He's like, all those things suck, man. Listen, this is what you need. You need a DeLorean, like a unicorn, some Flying V guitars, maybe like an AK-47 and like Tears of Heaven. I was like, listen up, dude. I'm going to make that shit. And like in 3 minutes, I just made the worst design I could possibly come up with. And it had a DeLorean, a Flying V, unicorn, AK-47, and like tears coming from the sky. Still to this day, the highest selling t-shirt we've ever had.
So that like a lot of the bands now actually make a fair amount of their money on merch.
Right. You have to.
Which is like I was talking to somebody and the numbers that they're making on merch, and like you think about it and you start figuring out, it's like, yeah, that's like one of their big ticket items.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a buddy of mine is in this band, Under Oath, big band, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And those dudes will like, they'll do a tour, a big ass tour, and then they'll disappear for like 3 years. And then they'll do a record and they'll do a tour, and they'll pull anywhere from like 45 to 100K a night in merch.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right. But it's because, here's the thing, when you do merch, you have to count in. So you have to give the venue the exact count of how many shirts, like quantity of each size, each design. And then at the end of the night, you have to count out, and they take a cut, right? And some places want 50%. You know what I mean? And I'm sure a band that big is like working out deals and probably has more muscle to get away with that. But imagine that like you're a band nobody's ever heard of. You have to sell your shirts for $45 because the headlining band is selling their shirts for $45. And whatever you do sell, you've got to give the venue half of, right? So at the end of the night, you got $40, you know? And you get in your van, maybe you have a hotel room, but like, especially festival tours, like Warped Tour type stuff, when you're like a smaller band on that circuit, you have to check in at 8 a.m. And sometimes the next venue is like 4 hours away. So you drive through the night, you get there, you don't get to park in like the cement parking lot. You got to park in the gravel parking lot and like truck all your shit through gravel and mud and stuff. It's exhausting, dude. And, you know, maybe if you had like downtime in between and you were making some money and like being able to set anything aside. I mean, I was dumb. My whole bonus went to a Vegas trip for my brother for his 21st birthday. He like bet me when I was doing all that, when we were touring a bunch before we got signed, and he was like, hey, if you ever get signed before my 21st birthday, you got to bring me to Vegas. And I got signed 4 weeks before he turned 21.
He's like, will you just write that check to Vegas, please?
Yeah. It was fun. It was one of the most fun times I've ever had in my life. Totally
It's crazy to like. Meg and I go to a lot of shows, and before we had kids, we probably go to at least 2 shows a month, and now we probably go to a show probably every other month. There's times where we'll go to a few in a month, but so we go to a lot, and she has a few favorites, and it's crazy to think that, you know, some of the quote unquote bigger names are still playing at the small, like the House of Blues in Boston, where it's like, and then we'll go to that show and it won't be sold out. And I oftentimes think about like, man, like this kid is on stage, he's busting his ass. He's show after show after show after show after show. And it's like, and there's just, he'll never get bigger.
Yeah.
And I've never known anything about the industry beyond what you just told me now, or before that. It's just crazy to think that, you know, that someone could just continually do something and be stuck in what I would call a rut, where it's like no matter what he does, new music comes out or not, it's still not a sold out show, but he's still there multiple times a year playing his ass off.
Yeah. I mean, music to me is the closest thing to like actual magic that exists, right? Like 4 dudes can like plug a bunch of random stuff into the wall and hit things with sticks and stuff, and somehow the combination of sounds that then commences creates this one product that can make somebody feel an emotion completely separate from another person who has a completely different emotion from the exact same combination of sounds. That's nuts, dude.
And you can change that emotion based on what that song is, what it sounds like. It is weird. I think I've never really thought of it as like magic, but I do think of what it does to my mind all the time, and like, you know, what it means to be a singer, what it means to be a musician. And it's like, you know, there's such a wide range of that, where it's like you go to an indie show or a hip hop show, and then you go to a metal show, and it's like both those guys are technically singers, but they are wildly different genres, and they make you feel totally different about your absolute existence.
Yeah. I mean, when you feel something so viscerally like that, it's like, it doesn't matter. Like, this is what I'm going to do the rest of my life. Right. I felt like that for sure. And, you know, I made decisions and choices and things like that paved a different path. But I'd like to at least think that like I've pretty much dedicated my entire adult life to creativity, right? In one form or another.
So how did, going from singing, it sounds like you were always designing kind of in the background out of almost necessity, or to try to get an edge in your, let's call it your career at the time, music. When did that change? In 2011 when you guys broke up?
Yeah, I mean, I would make a little bit of cash on the road because some of the bigger bands would see our merch setup and be like, who's doing all this? This looks so much better than us. I was like, it's me. I'm doing it on a crappy laptop in the van. And so, you know, they give me like $50, $100 to do a t-shirt design, which was cool. You know, and then I'd do some stuff for the label and some posters and some album covers and things like that. And it was in like doing more and more of that. I mean, I was a terrible designer when I first started. Like I had no idea what I was doing. I just kind of the same way, like with music, like I never learned music theory. So I just made stuff that I thought sounded cool. And similarly with design, like it was probably to like design rules and standards and alignment and things like that. Like totally wrong, but I liked it. It looked cool. But yeah, when the band broke up, I got a couple of other guys, my brother and a couple other friends, and we kind of would go do a couple shows on the weekend as like the same name because, you know, there were still people, at least regionally, that would pay to see us. Like locally, we were super successful. You know, like that's how we funded everything. If we were doing a 3-month tour, we would do a Friday night, like 18 and up show at this one spot. And then we'd leave all of our stuff. And on Saturday, we'd do an all ages show. Right. And they'd sell out like 600 to 800 person venue, both shows. We take all that, and that's what we'd use to live off of for the next couple of months. But yeah, it was doing that stuff. And then, you know, when everything kind of started to teeter out, I was like, what am I going to do? So I started doing that for other bands locally. And then I went back to school at LSU and I got a digital art degree because I couldn't get accepted into graphic design. Because they have like these standards and rules, like you have to be able to draw a straight line and color in the lines and stuff like that. And I just kept failing it. So I got a digital art degree, which was like, you do some printmaking, you do some photography, you do some web design, some 3D modeling, but you just do like 1 or 2 classes of each. Which I don't really feel was great because it kind of sets you up as like a jack of all trades, master of none. And then I got a couple of jobs at some print shops, and I was doing like the 3 a.m. to 1 p.m. graveyard shift. And then I got a job at a web design agency. I was like, man, I could do this my own way. And then I started this thinking like, oh man, this will be easy.
Famous last words.
Oh man. I'm like, these days I have like graphic design professors and they're like, hey, you want to come like talk about your work? I'm like, no, I want to come and talk to those kids about everything other than the work that you're not telling them, you know?
As far as like looking to get into your industry.
Yeah, man. Business, whether it's like going into business for yourself or being a subcontractor or like getting hired, you know, it's like, they don't teach you about taxes and like self-employment taxes, dude. That shit's nuts.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't save any of that $10,000 from that signing bonus.
But you owed it.
But I owed $3,333 at the end of the year that I didn't have. I have owed the IRS money since I was 18 years old. Mm-hmm. You know? But it also means that I've just pretty much worked for myself my entire adult life, which is rad.
It's funny. I think I just saw something about the governor of Florida had instated something about financial literacy and like enforcing it in schools. It's like I feel like we talk about it all the time. Like since I've been in school, where it's like, why didn't anyone teach me about taxes and employment, self-employment tax, and it's like, or even just like how to properly invest. Like there's nothing out there. It's simply, you know, hey, figure it out on your own. We're gonna teach you everything, all this other shit. But, you know, looking at what you said about theory, right? Like you didn't study music theory, you just kind of played what sounded great, and you took that into design as well. Looking at it now, do you see what is the importance of the theory in what you do today?
I mean, you know, when we started 7 years ago, we were trying to create this like anti-agency. And it was, you don't need process. Process is like the destroyer of creativity, right? Totally wrong. You know, you have to have process. You have to have things like that. I learned like the other way around, like start as a giant just shit show of a mess, and then figure out how to make sense of things as I go along and learn. And I think that there is value at failing really well like that and learning and continuously building at the same time. So I think, by this time, like, now I know theory of design and I know what best practices are, but I also have, 7 years of cutting my teeth with failure and mistakes to then say, well, I can still challenge those things. Whereas when you go the other way around and you're like fresh out of design school and they've pretty much focused just on those theory things, right? You're almost like afraid to think outside of the box or to like challenge anything, this is the type of font I have to use if I want something to show motion. This is the type of font I have to use if I want to create branding for an elegant, high level brand. You know what I mean? And then what you get is like that shit I was telling you at the beginning is you get a whole bunch of really well-designed, clean, forgettable work. And there's more of that exists in the world than there are the crazy stuff that you remember. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's probably true about most art forms. Like art is supposed to be this self-expression, and it turns out to be just like what everyone else sees and just kind of regurgitating a lot of the same shit over and over. And it could be music, it could be tattoos, it could be fine art, it could be graphic design. And it's like, if you're supposed to be expressing yourself or you're hired to be expressing somebody's company, how can all of this look the same?
Right.
If it's truly art. And I think that is kind of lost, and that a lot of people, there's a lot of people out there who have businesses or design firms, and they don't have either formal training or they've never experienced, like you said, what you have, just going out and cutting your teeth and learning the hard way, that all they can do is basically rip off other people. And then it's just like this diluted version of what was halfway decent before, and then it keeps kind of like going and going and going, and there's this I just feel like it's watered down, and it's tough because not a lot of people are putting out like unique artwork. They're too mindful of what else is out there, and I think that it's definitely good to have that formal training, but it's also like you have to fuck shit up for a long time. And
right.
that relates to our industry as well. That's not just exclusive to what you're doing.
It's white kitchens and shiplap, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But even what you just said, it's like you started, on the other end where you were just doing it and then you were going to figure out as you go. That's something that is huge in our industry because there's so many owner operators. There's so many one-man shows, and it's like, and guys are getting into it because they like building. In your case, you like design. And it wasn't that you went into it being like, hey, I could build a really successful ad agency and crush it and make $1 million a year if I hire the right people. It was like, I just want to design cool shit and hopefully get paid for it and not get screwed.
Right.
And that's that I think we can summarize craftsmanship in general that's oftentimes how people build a business out of craftsmanship, because it's centered around the actual craft and the desire to create.
Yep. I think it's similar to Tyler's point. Like it's anything where you're creating, right? Like any time that you're building something, there's creativity involved, even with plans and measurements and stuff. Like you're still creating something. If you're, courting a relationship with a potential client, or just like out and out, like you're creating relationships. Like there's creation in everything, in every aspect, right? But yeah, I think when you come out of school and you don't have somebody teach you like the basics of business and stuff like that, and all you have is these fundamentals, you know what I mean? 90% of those kids are just going to like go get a job as a junior designer at an ad agency and do a bunch of grunt work and cut their teeth doing that kind of stuff. And then they'll work up their way and things like that. And they may love it, they may not. But when you start from a place of passion And like, whether it's music or it's building or it's design, when you're like, I fucking love this. I love waking up every day and thinking about this. I'm on Pinterest the first thing in the morning. I'm on Pinterest when I'm laying in bed, just like looking at cool shit. It's not even just like logos. It's like packaging and, you know, interior design and just like anything cool. You know what I mean? It's one of those things that like, it doesn't matter if I know the business side of it, I'll figure that out, you know? And it's one of the things I love most about working with folks in you guys' industry is the insane similarities in what we do, and including like the processes and everything. You know, like I said before, at the beginning of our company, when Lance, my partner, and I were building it, I was like so against processes. Like, dude, don't project manage me. Don't give me a list.
Right.
I'm terrible at email. I don't know how to read a spreadsheet. Just like, let me make cool shit with cool people. And do cool shit with cool people is still like our number one ethos. But I've learned along the way that if you don't have processes, scaling and growing, which is either something that you are trying to achieve or just something that happens to you.
Right.
Because you're doing cool work with cool people and they're telling their friends about it. And their friends are coming and saying, hey, can you do this for me? Like, you have to have processes to keep the machine going. You know, we're at a growth point right now where the challenge is like, how do you still keep some of that piss and vinegar from year one in what we're doing and keep some of that magic while, you know, continuously executing these processes that are allowing growth to happen? Because that's a split, I think, that happens oftentimes in any industry. But, you know, working with folks in your industry, everything lines up. It's so easy to talk to you guys about what we do, but it's also like there's an appreciation. You know what I mean? Most of the time, and I guarantee it's the same for you guys. Trust is the most important aspect of a project, right? And it's always the clients that don't trust you and are trying to micromanage things or trying to penny pinch a budget and stuff like that. Those always end up being the worst projects. And the best ones are when the people are like, how much is that going to cost? Okay, cool. Let me know when you guys are ready for me to come see it. That you do your best work,
right? Because
they trust you. You know what I mean? So it's not difficult for me to establish that trust because I can say a few things that are it's in line with the same things that you guys struggle with. I say this is important to us too, but also crafting, attention to detail. Why are we making this decision? You know what I mean? Like, why are you choosing this substrate or why are you choosing this finish? You know, it makes for like a really cool relationship, and the process becomes simple and the end result is just better for it.
Yeah, I'm sure even, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but like if you have a customer who comes to you and they're looking to design something or a logo, and it's like probably very similar to what we say, where it's like, do you have any ideas? Do you have any inspiration? You know, give me some direction, rather than taking stabs in the dark or something that you like, and then we can put our own sense of style on it.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure is very similar, because it's like, I don't know, even getting tattooed, all tattooers are like, you know, our favorite customers are the ones who come to us and like they have an idea of what they want, but just let us run with it.
Yeah.
Where it's like they don't say like I don't care, whatever, do whatever. There's some direction, but it's not like you're not micromanaging that process.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the people who are going to you for your expertise and they're like, I have an idea of what I want.
Yeah.
And I've also done my research and I really love what you do. If you can take what I want generally and do it your way, that would be ideal. At the same, I think the inverse side of that are the people that come to you and want a very specific thing that is like the wrong thing.
Yeah.
You know? So it used to be the first couple of years of our business, I could talk to somebody for like 15 minutes, ask them some questions about their business and stuff like that. And in my head, I see what I want the logo to look like, but that's what I want the logo to look like. And it could be successful. You know, it could create value and growth potential, et cetera. But sometimes it's like it's wrong or it's not in line with what their vision is. So the way that we combat that is I had this kid, Hunter. He was an intern from LSU coming in to like do sales. And he was like, he asked me one day when I was doing some design, he was like, why did you make that decision? I was like, It looks cool, you know, like it's going to be badass when he was like, but why? And God, dude, I hated it. I hated him asking me that question. And he started like, and he still to this day, my favorite thing about Hunter is he challenges everything in a healthy way. But the end result was he decided like, I'm going to put together some questions and ask you some stuff. And then I'm going to put together a document of like what the brand is, like who are you? Why are you making this? And I'm going to do it for our brand first. And I was super skeptical. And by the end of reading through that document, I was like, okay, we have a new service, right? It's brand strategy. And what's brilliant about how that brand strategy service has evolved for us, because we did it with Nick, right? When we did a rebrand. And like, I knew Nick's brand backwards and forward, you know, I created that thing from the ground up with him 8 years ago when we were doing a website. And I was like, hey, let's do a logo. Let's do this. And, you know, just put design, build, repeat as just like a placeholder. And then it just stuck, right? But we do this brand strategy piece before anything, and it's for us to get to know the brand, but also to ask the challenging questions to the brand themselves. And at the end, we have this document that's, you know, got your typical like mission, vision, positioning, etc., but it's like tone of voice. It's who you are not. And there's these key words throughout this document. It's usually like 6 pages long or something like that. But there's these key words in that document that I can translate into design, right? I can say, if you want to be masculine but approachable, I'm going to slightly round the corners of all the lettering in your logo. And I'm not going to use a serif font. I'm still going to use a sans serif font, right? And I can take all of these things where I'm no longer like throwing darts against a wall to see what sticks. And even if they come to me with some direction, like I'll create a mood board based off of that strategy, but I'm able to like really objectively make design decisions and show it to them and say like, this is no longer just what I think is cool. This is what is the best solution for your brand. And it's an objective, like I'm objectively clicking these boxes off. There's probably 1,000 other ways that other designers could have designed this and still check those boxes off. And people aren't working with us for the good design. Like good design should just be like an understood. People are working with us because of the experience of working with us. And, you know, there's always going to be design intuition, like you said, the art side of things that we're putting in there. And that's the kind of subjective, subconscious magic piece that makes the branding unique and memorable and distinguishable. Like we always say, branding, Sagi Haviv is a brilliant designer out of New York. And he says branding has to be simple, distinguishable, and memorable. And it can't be 2 of those 3. It has to be all 3. So if we go by those, you know, 3 rules and we're objectively checking off based off of strategy, man, at this point, we've had 0 clients come back and say, this isn't what I wanted. Right?
How many people overcomplicate that? Like you said, it has to be simple. And I feel like that would be a huge thing where it's like people come to you and you're like, there's just way too much going on right now, where it's like, let's really refine this and kind of dumb it down some.
Yeah. I mean, oftentimes people want to have input.
Yeah.
Right. And so the way that I facilitate that is being extremely, here's a first buzzword, hopefully not many more, agile in the approach, where it's not like okay, you're going to give us a check for 50% up front. We're going to have this like phone call and ask you a million questions. And then we'll call you in like 3 months when we're ready to show you something. And then there's this big aha moment. I don't ever want to have ahs type pitches. It should be every week or 2, we're like hitting another like macro milestone. And so by the time that they see the design, they've had input along the way, whether it's in like the mood boarding phase where I'm like, okay, if we're going to go with typography, this is the type of fonts that we would use. If we're going to do custom lettering, this is how we would approach it. This is texture, this is color, this is pattern, this is icons, etc. And so when they see that first round, it shouldn't be like, oh my God, this is incredible. It should be like, this is exactly what I was expecting to see. What are the next steps, right? That's that process that you have to get down that allows you to keep doing the magic part and scale. Because before I had any of that in place, it would, you know, I would be give me 50% up front. You'll hear from me when you hear from me, and you don't really create trust or a relationship with somebody that has any kind of longevity.
I think the relationship between trust and process is something that's really important here. And I think about, I was the same way, Drew, when I started hiring people, is that, oh, you don't have a job title. Everyone's just going to come to work and we're going to do cool stuff. Yeah. And and then it was like, well, what's how many vacation days do I get? I was like, whatever you want, take whatever you want. It's freedom. And it's like, and I wasn't putting these processes in place, and it was just like a nightmare. People were like, well, I don't really know, like, if I'm working alongside him, where does my responsibility start and stop? And where does that person's come in? And I know you said I can take any day off, but I don't want to like over ask. And so I'm not really going to take any time off. And it's the same thing with clients. It's like, if we just build a house and there's no process, like, well, what are next steps? It's like, we're just going to build your house. It's like, well, don't you have to do this and that first? It's like, well, yeah, we will. They want to understand the process. And for us, like, that's completely changed for us, where it's like everything is a process now. It's like, this is how we're doing this. This is what you're going to expect now. And you're absolutely right. You are in fact building trust, not with your team and with, your potential client.
And I never really thought of it like that, how like involving a client in every step of the process has this like side effect of building trust. Like, it's not just informing them or keeping everybody accountable to a schedule or whatever, but it's, I think, most importantly, building trust, right?
I think one of the coolest things that I've experienced with you is that, there was never an aha. Like, I remember where I was and what I was doing when you had said, hey, I want to show you what I've been working on for NS Builders. And you said, and I plan on like revising and tweaking a couple things, but here's where I'm at right now. And I just said, I love it. Let's move forward with it. But even more recently, like when we were working on the Materia brand, we would meet and you'd show me, and like we were making progress really quick, like, or you guys were making progress really fast behind the scenes. And then we started talking one day about like, I feel like we're there, but there's just a few things I feel like we need to modify. And you said, let's do this now. And you pulled up your screen, and I think you said, I don't typically do this, but I'm going to design live in front of you. Yeah. And I'm watching, for me, that built trust. That built, like, that's where I started realizing that the theory in what you're doing is showing, where it's like, I could go in and type up text and write the word materia and make it all lowercase, but you were inside, like, changing the radiuses of the lettering, and maybe smoothing over the edge and increasing the character spacing because you wanted the bottom. It was just all of these minor tweaks, and as you were doing it, you were talking, like, you were basically verbalizing the rules of design as you were doing it. And that's why I brought that the whole theory thing up way back, or a few minutes ago, is like, that's what makes a professional, even in our side, where it's like, when you understand the theory of why something is done a particular way, it changes your entire approach to doing it. Where it's like, for building, if you understand the theory of why you have to nail plywood 6 inches on center on the edge for shear, if you understand truly what that's doing and what it's actually accomplishing, when you go to do it again, you, like, it's automatic, and you trust the process because you now understand the theory of why it's done. And it's the same thing on design for you, where that's why I asked it what your thought was, is has that changed? And obviously, it has.
Yeah, a great deal. But I also think that it positions you to break the rules better.
That's fair, yeah. If you understand.
I know that we use the word intentionality a lot when you and I talk. And I think it's so important.
It's my buzzword.
Yeah, there's your buzzword. But it's like, when you're talking about the one of the things that we were designing a couple weeks ago, and I was moving around the lettering on a 8.5 by 11 beautiful image of like some of your work, always beautiful images, you know, black overlay, a little bit of transparency, like this is the NSB way. And then like I have guides for all the other text, but for this one piece, I'm just going to like stick it right here. You're like, why? Like, because man, it's weird. People are going to like notice it. If it's just like centered like in the ass middle of this whole page, people are just going to like, you know, keep scrolling through it. And people's minds, they process content so quickly and so differently now than we used to. You know, I think social media, Tyler said something earlier, and it made me think about like how social media has changed people's perception of so many things, but also people, like how people communicate. And it's difficult at times to create value within a space that is so just overwhelmingly, you know, just overloaded with content, just
infinite,
you know, like how do you stand out?
Right.
You know what I mean? And I think that there's always going to be people who are successfully being like disruptive and eye catching when they are doing things against the rules without knowing it. Right. That's like, I think what fine art is, you know, or like David Cho just like slinging yellow paint on a statue from, you know, a slingshot. I don't know. But when you're working with somebody else's brand, like you have a lot of responsibility. You can't just throw random stuff out there because you think it's cool. You know what I mean? Like everything I do has to add or create value for your brand because I care about it. And so if I am going to break those rules, I have to first understand the rules, but then if I'm going to break it, it has to be with intentionality, and that way it's successful. Right?
It's interesting that you said that because what, you know, before you were kind of going through all that, what's going through my head is that like in order to be able to break those rules or understand how far you can push them, you have to know where those constraints and guidelines are in the first place. And like it, you know, you may just by happenstance break some of those rules and it works out well early in your career where it's just like, hey, you know what, that was just that was a coincidence that worked out. But it's like as you progress and as you grow and you realize like, all right, I was way too far outside the lines there, I gotta tone it back down. And then, you know, 5-10 years later you actually understand what you're doing and kind of see like where those guidelines are and well, I could push this one a little bit here, this one needs to. But it's not until, you know, you screw those things up and you push them to a point early in your career where you're like, all right, yeah, that's not right, that you now develop those constraints, or at least, you know, you kind of come to realization where those are.
Right. I mean, so it seems like though, in you guys' world, like when you're building something, there's a very like clear-cut way of how you're supposed to build something, right? How do you exercise pushing outside of those boundaries when there's something that's so like mechanical, if you will, of like the process of building?
I think it just comes down more so to the design end of things, just like you, where it's like you can figure out how to make something happen and maybe the construction of it isn't, you know, as basic as what you think, but if you can kind of step outside those bounds from a design standpoint, you'll figure out how to make that based on your basic principles that like it's kind of all comes together the same way, but it may be a different sequence. But I think that's where it comes into play with what we do, where it's not so much like we're going to build this differently. It's like, let's design this differently, and then we can use how we know how to build to make it different.
And even just from like even the minute details, like that's what we focus on all the time, where it's like, hey, you know, I think about one of our more common things is like, hey, the design has glass on this wall and it's got, you know, 3/4 inch channel on the ceiling and the wall and the floor. Like, hey, let's bury that channel in the wall and think about like that's a more difficult way to accomplish it, but the end result will be really like really intriguing because it will look like how did they accomplish that? And I think that architecture, especially when you're able to build new, there's the traditional way of building, but no one said that you have to build a house the traditional way. It's just the most reproduced way of doing it. And you think of architecture or architects that push the boundary of that, of using different materials. There's this famous house in, I think it's in Spain, where it's this series of like precast U-shaped concrete panels that are stacked in a way, and it has this wild cantilever on it. And when you look it up, the wild cantilever is only accomplished because they decided to put a huge piece of granite on the other end of it to counteract the weight. And I'm gonna look it up in a minute, and I'll revert back to it. But
I'd feel like it's not that much different than what you do. I think that with anything that we're doing with the house, there's kind of two things. One is you have to understand traditional design and scaling and proportions and what kind of feels right. And going outside of those boundaries is a risk. And it's that kind of coincides with what you were saying. It's like, if you're building this house for yourself, that's one thing. Like, it looks cool. But now, like, you have your client's best interest in mind. So, like, you can't just throw shit at a wall and see what sticks. Like, you have to have their best interest in mind. So if you have a customer who says that, yeah, like, make it the craziest thing ever, that's one thing. But for most cases, like, you have to build so that your customer is going to be happy, and it can't just be this, like, it can't entirely be an artistic expression of yourself.
Not for the right client, it can be, but sure. Even to relate it back to design, there's some design that the client doesn't want, overly artistic. Hey, I just want the basic. Get me a cover letter put together. The house I was talking about is the Hemeroscopian house by Ensemble Studios. So it's built in Madrid. It's wild, but on the same plane, you were talking about painters earlier, and I think about paint and fine art, where you hear the people that walk through the museum and they're like, "That's art. Like, I could build that, or I could paint that." And it's Hunt Slonim. And he has these famous bunnies he paints, and it's I'm looking at it. It's probably 4 brush strokes. It's the shape of his head, the head with the ears, 2 eyes, and then a face with a nose, a smile with a nose, and that's it.
Right.
And I say that's it, but I'm looking at one right here. It's a painting. There's 2 of them on the canvas, and it's selling for $8,700.
Yeah.
And there's another one that's, I don't know how big it is, but it's a large canvas, and it's $100,000. And it's but there's value in it because someone has decided that there's value in that. And I think that design, and this is where I have these deep conversations oftentimes when I'm in like a group of people that in person, where it's like, listen, we're building homes. There's an opportunity for us to push the level of creativity. Not every house is going to have the ability to do this, but not every painting is going to have the ability to do this. Not every design, like anything that you think about from a creativity standpoint, isn't always going to have the opportunity to do this. But there are people that will pay, and it's not necessarily about the money, but the money relates to it because of the time invested in order to achieve something really, really great. And I think about that all the time when it comes to our homes, where it's like we could, and I think we had this conversation with Brian Osborne. Like, if we structured it right and we were pushing the boundary of design and the boundary of construction and a more creative solution on how to accomplish things, there is inherent value to that, and there's people that value it at a higher price point.
Right.
And the other, I just wanted to reference him because I find him so interesting, but along the same lines of paint, Kalen Schaub, it's basically #fake art movement. And, people, he constantly gets people saying, this isn't real art. This isn't real art.
Right.
And he's wild. He has this studio where he has these massive canvases, and he paints them all white or all black, and then he fills this trough with all these paint colors in like a rainbow formation, and then he spins the canvas, and he throws the thing across it, and it puts this wild like paint striation through it, and he grabs it and pulls it off, and he lets it dry, and he stands it up, and he goes $50,000.
Yep.
And it's like, why would you? And he sells them, and as he should. But it's, you know, it's wild to think that why would someone say that that's not art? And what you think one of the and I guess just to summarize, it's like he understands the constraints of what art is, and he's decided to break the rules. Right.
I also think, and this is like super important because you mentioned earlier that like it's valued at that because someone says it is, right? One of the things about building a brand or refreshing a brand, that like going back to that brand strategy piece, is like the positioning of your brand matters. You know, Target coined this phrase cheap chic, and when you hear those two words together, you're like immediately, yeah, that's Target. They're like cheap chic, right? Completely different from Walmart. Not much different in pricing, if not pretty similar in general. But the idea that your brain makes when you say Target is like, I'm gonna go get some cool shit for my house, right? And that's done intentionally. Everything that they do is done that way. When we work with new brands and we're doing that strategy piece, we often like identify, and we did it ourselves, right? When we started, I was doing logos for $500. I was doing a website for $800, like whatever I could get. And you do that out of necessity. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And so it's difficult at times to do this, but where I'm getting is, we have clients that are starting something new, or they're coming from somewhere that they've been at for 20 years and they're starting their own thing, and they're badass at what they do, right? And they don't want to be the affordable brand. They want to be, you're going to come to me because you're going to get an incredible product, or you're going to get something completely unique. And, you know, they're like, oh, when we launch this, we should do like some sort of like giveaway campaign or some sort of like 50% off. Like, dude, never do that if you're trying to create like a luxury brand, or, you know, the not affordable price point brand. But all that stuff matters, right? Especially when it comes to design. If I know going into the design phase that this is a brand new brand, but they are, you know, on the higher end of the price point, they're trying to attract this specific demographic, I'm going to design that differently. You know what I mean? It might be very subtle, but I'm still going to approach it differently. And it's so important to have that strategy in the back of your mind, because you can come out there and I can say, hey, my logos are $50,000. I might sell one a year, but I'll still sell it. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
And that's so. And this is something that has come up in a recent conversation. What you just said, you'll do one, instead of having to do 100 at $500.
Right. Exactly.
Where it's like you're at the end of the day, you're making the same amount of money, and you're able to dedicate more time to less, divide it up in less pockets. Where I think that's the goal. Like, to increase your price is in efforts to give you the ability to spend more time on less things.
Right. Yeah. I told you when we moved to a retainer-based model that our whole goal was we want to do more work with less people.
Right.
Like, how can I provide ongoing value for your brand?
I thought you were calling to tell me that I was not one of those people when you told me that.
No, you know better. No, it's, you know, I think when you talk about like creating ongoing value, and the difference between delivering like a Dropbox folder of like logo files and be like, good luck, figure that shit out, man. You know, like, I know exactly how to use the logos, right, and which versions to use, because we don't ever design just one logo. It's like all responsive, and you're getting a whole suite of stuff.
And it's funny, like we just had this conversation internally too, where, as you know, we have a million things that we're working on behind the scenes, and a bunch of our documents and proposals and things that we're building. And I was always the one adding this like fancy cover page, and I was taking this template off of wherever and modifying it. And finally I said, why am I doing this? And I think Tyler, you and I talked about this recently. It's like, why am I in a position where I'm trying to be the best at my craft, and then I'm not working with someone that's the best at their craft? Where it's like, now it's like, and I'm probably gonna have to up my retainer with you, but now I talk to my team and they're like, hey, what do you want to do for, like, what do you want this to look like? I'm like, send it to Drew.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, I'm like, no. It's like, if we're gonna do this, let's do this right. It's like, we're lettering new vans. I'm like, Drew, this is my idea, but I want you to run with it.
Right.
And because exactly, you had this vision of what the brand looked like before I did. And I loved it. So why wouldn't I continue to see where you take that creativity?
Right. But you've also built like the infrastructure and logistics internally to create like a system and a team where you can, with trust, hand something off like that. Because I'm notorious at being like, I'm just going to do this myself.
Right.
Like, I'll take care of it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, it's taken me 8 years to finally get to a point where it's like, all right, let Drew do that.
Right.
Let them.
I'm still not there yet.
Well, I know, but it's hard. Like, it's hard because there are things where it's like, someone could be listening to this, but like, dude, you're just all you're doing is wasting money. You're just sending it back to Drew when realistically you can take your Word document and drop your logo in it. But it's not about that. It's not because I don't want to drop my logo on it, or that if I drop my logo, I'm going to do it wrong. It's that I am setting out to be the best. So if I want to be in the number one spot, I need to have consistency. And there needs to be this developed system. Here's our third buzzword of the episode, of how we utilize our brand and what our brand looks like across all media.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think consistency is super important with your brand as well. And it's not that you can't drop that on a Word document, but if there's a system to integrate, or Drew has an idea how this all should come together, like, I always feel that the artwork and the graphic design, like you said earlier, Drew, that's a given. You should be able to do that. But I think that what really differentiates you, or somebody else with what they do, it's the personality that they put into it and kind of being able to tell who did what, where it's like, and that's not to say that everything you come up with is a completely 100% unique idea that you can't, because I don't believe that there really are any of them. Like, you're stealing, everyone's stealing from everyone and paying homage to the past. But I think that you are able to put your own kind of flair on those things. And I think that's where the consistency comes in, where it's like, you can tell that one person had their hand in designing all of this, and there's continuity and consistency, and that's the personality, and that's kind of what makes your brand, and that's very important to me.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, I think consistency, oftentimes you'll see these super expansive, like, brand guidelines books, like, I just had to work around the Indian motorcycle brand guidelines. It's because I did about 30 hours of design on this project and sent it to them. They're like, oh, wait, we didn't send you our brand guidelines, did we? And they sent it to me. It's like, no, you clearly didn't. Like, nothing that I did adhered to those guidelines at all. And at the end of the day, where it landed was like complete opposite side of the spectrum from what I designed without that in my head, and very, very boring, right? It was a black and white picture of a motorcycle with a maroon overlay and their logo placed in the middle. Like, you didn't need to, you didn't need me to do that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you had gone with what I did, it would have been super special, totally different, extremely unique, inspired by the brand and the research that I did. But I often feel like sometimes those brand guidelines, when you just hand that off, they get interpreted, especially as a business grows and scales and there's more people involved. They get interpreted so literally within those brand guidelines that you lose like even the option of creating like character within the brand across different pieces. So like to your point, you know, anybody could have like taken that photo and put a black overlay and put the NS Builders logo somewhere on it. But I have this like intimate understanding of that brand, and I've worked so closely on everything from a business card to a van wrap to a, you know, 2-3 websites now, you know, like everything like I've touched. And so it's why when I did that, I chose the specific picture. I scaled it and cropped it at a specific place to take out a specific line that was kind of distracting in the top right corner because of like where the cabinets ended on the wall. So I scaled it up a little bit. It's why the black is not just always at 90%. Sometimes it's at 95%. Sometimes it's at 50%. You know, like it's based off of, at this point, subjectivity on my part, and then where I put the logo, how wide that logo was. You know, most people like make the logo as big as fucking possible, you know, just slap it in the middle of everything. It's why it's like a little small, but like you'll never forget that cover page, and it's so on brand because of that, right? And at the same time, it's 3 elements. It's a picture, a black square, and a logo file. But it's completely unique, and no one else would have done it that way. And I think there's something special there. It's the same thing I talked about when you're starting a brand and you're, you know, determining your positioning and your price point and, you know, how you want people to perceive your brand. You know, to Nick's point, I agree. Like, part of what we do is we want to help people. And if we feel like you're not getting value out of what you're paying us, I could be like, dude, you don't need to pay me. I've told people, you don't need to pay me to like put your logo on a document like that. But I also like custom laid out the entire rest of that document. Right. So there's the trust is in like, I would say, hey, this is not adding value, or hey, I would charge you $150 an hour to do something that you can do in 20 minutes. Right? You save that money. Oftentimes it's also like stuff I just don't like really want to do. Yeah. But yeah, you know, it's the truth at the same time.
Right.
I'm just like masking it with like, I'm saving you money.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, and I'm curious too, because you say like the build, you have to understand like the basics of building. It's in the design that you get to, you know, create and have input and stuff like that. How much do you get to have input on that?
Well, that to answer that question, that depends. Like, there's guys that are design build, there's guys that, you know, or guys and girls that deal with designers and architects, and depending on the relationship between the architect and designer, there can be collaboration, and there can be no, stay in your lane and you're going to build based on what I design. But that's not the only area that we get to be creative. And I watched this show Grand Designs a lot, and they built this house, and they built this they decided that they were going to build a passive home, meaning that the home required very little energy to heat and cool. And one of the ways they did it is it was in design, but it's also in theory, in the sense of they built this massive concrete cube in the center of the house with south-facing windows, and when the sun beat through the window, it warmed up that concrete surface enough that it kept the entire house warm. And that wasn't necessarily an architect, maybe it was an engineer, but it was someone that decided to challenge the way that a home could be heated and cooled. Right. And it was like, listen, here's an opportunity for us to heat the home using the power of the sun coming through the windows. And, you know, and maybe that's not super relatable to quote unquote normal construction or normal remodeling, but there is a lot of similarities there, where oftentimes there's an intention behind the design, but there's a lot of, you know, open for interpretation in the field.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's like, hey, this is the tile that we're going to be using. I didn't do a tile layout, lay it out the best of your ability. It's like, wonderful. Like, now I get the ability to kind of cater what this tile looks like, and I'll decide where the cuts go because I want to hide them. I'll decide where the niche goes so I'm not notching tile. I'll decide like what that profile edge is. We've done it where, we had a small bathroom, so we decided to make the tile completely flush with the adjacent wallboard because we as the builder felt as though that little half-inch lip that would normally be there would be a distraction when you walked into the space. And it's like, what do you mean a distraction? It's like, it's just an edge that your eye could catch, where this room is so small that I want your eye to not have an edge to catch.
I got to write that down because we're about to remodel our house next month and we got a small ass bathroom.
But it's all, like, it's all of these little things that you take into consideration in the way that you're putting something together. And it can be brought all the way back to framing, where it's like you're gonna frame a particular way where it's like, hey, this is the roof, and I'm not a roof. I've never framed a complex roof, but I can only imagine that when you're looking at a roof and you understand, hey, this is the way the roof is intended to be built. But then when you're on site and you're looking at it, it's like, no, I get what the intention is here, but we would actually be able to reduce lumber by doing an overframe here because you don't actually that whatever it is. Like, my point is that there's so much that gets put on the executor that we get to look and decide on, hey, here is the best way we can do that. And ultimately, we hope that we choose the right thing to provide the most value. And if you can do it in a creative way, I think that's what fuels me. Yeah. Where it's like when we get to express our creativity or challenge something and be more creative, like that's what fuels me. And I can only imagine that's how everyone feels in that situation.
I mean, even if you think, building a cabinet, there's 100 different ways to build that cabinet. And it's like, do you want to have it completely glued up with no fasteners? Do you want to use hidden fasteners? Can you hide fasteners places where it's like the design on paper is the exact same thing? Like if you get a design from an architect or an interior designer, and then it's up to you to decide how you want to build that and kind of what level you want to take it to. But I think that a lot of that comes down to something that you had said earlier, where it's like your customers should be doing their homework as to why they're choosing you. Yeah. Like somebody who comes to you and wants you to do something like Indian motorcycles, where like you didn't need me. This isn't what anyone can do this. You came to me for what I do. And obviously, there was a miscommunication there, but I think that the level of kind of what you can put into any project for us comes down to that customer. And when it's stuff like this, I always equate it to even getting tattooed, because it's an art form. And it's like, I'm going to go to somebody because I like the style of their tattoos, and I don't necessarily need to know what I'm getting, or like it needs to be this exact way. But it's like, I like the way that they do animal heads, so I'm gonna go and be like, hey, what type of animal head do you want to do? And like trust them enough that they're gonna knock it out of the park, and I'm gonna love it. And I'm not gonna show me the drawing 6 times, like, where do you want to put it? I don't know, here's a spot that I have open, you tell me where it looks best, because you're looking at it from 10 feet away from me, I'm looking down at my hip. Like, I just think that it's, as a customer, you should be doing your homework. Who do I want to do this tattoo for me? Who's, who has the style that I want? Who's going to be able to, if it needs to be drawn on in place? And I think that it's no different than when somebody hires a builder. It's like, you should be doing your homework and looking up 5-6 builders and then going to see their jobs. And then the person that you hire, obviously it does come down to money, but it's also like, you should be picking the person that stylistically and their process really fits and works for you. And that would be, if I needed to hire a graphic designer, it's like, well, what do I want mine to look like? Whose stuff do I like? What's their price point? What's their turnaround? And you're kind of adding all these things up and making your decision based on that. But you can't go to somebody to build you or design you one thing when their style and their personality is something else. Maybe they'll do it, but like, it's just not fair to everyone.
Right.
That's what kind of comes to my head, where it's like, even what you were saying early in the conversation about starting your business and not knowing what you're doing. And I think that so much of that process for you banging your head against the wall develops the personality in your work. And like at the end of the day, the graphic design should be a given. Like you should be getting hired for your personality of your work. Right. If it's art.
Yeah. I love that the comparison to tattoos, because I remember like getting my first couple of tattoos and being like, this is I want this.
Yeah.
Draw it for me. Let me see what you got, right?
Nothing different.
And it's like now I don't give a shit what it is. Like as long as like whoever's doing it, the guy or the girl, has like you're right. I haven't been tattooed in probably 4 years at this point, but if I were, I would just go to someone who does really rad shit that I like and be like, dude, I don't care what you do.
Yeah.
Like have fun, do something rad. Here's all the possible spots. This is my budget. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that, now, not to say that like you can do that for a business, right? Like you can't just necessarily go in, but there's also, when you have word of mouth, which I'd say like 75 to 80% of our business or sales leads, if you will, comes from word of mouth. And there's oftentimes people that are like, I have a law firm. I'm like, have you seen our shit?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's kind of punk rock for a law firm.
Right. But then like the end result's great. Like we've done 2 law firm branding projects in the last 2 years and they're dope. You know what I mean?
What kind of law?
And 2 completely different. Like one is 75 lawyers that do industrial like pipeline stuff, like all old white dudes. And the other one is like all like young female Latinx owned, and both projects crush, dude. You know what I mean? But it's like the word of mouth built that trust like prior to doing that. And so because of that, I was like, no matter what, I'm going to really crush it for these guys. Like I become so vested at such an early stage with that kind of a relationship, you know? And it's like, hey, it's going to take a little extra time on the strategy. It's going to take a little extra time on like the research and the mood boarding and stuff like that. But like when it comes to the execution phase of the design, it's, you know, it's one of the reasons why I told Nick, Lance hates when I like show people me designing, because I'm fast as fuck. And like some people want to like value what you do based on like how much time you spent on it. Right. You know what I mean? And I don't value like what I do based on how much time I spend on it. I've designed logos in 30 minutes and I've designed logos in 30 hours, you know, but I like to think that it's the time that I've spent within this space and everything, the experience. I also think though that it's not just about the time that you spend behind the computer. And I think this is the same for you guys. I often wait till the very last minute to actually sit behind the computer and execute moving pixels around. But for the week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before that, like I'm moving things around in my head and I'm thinking about it. You know what I mean?
Right there with you. I'm all like, it's so hard for me to even just want to sit down earlier than that.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I've been having to put together this presentation for the last couple weeks that I'm taking to Nashville next week, and I knew what it was, and I've been thinking about it, and I knew what I wanted to look like, and I knew what all the content was, and every time I sat down the last couple weeks, I just was like, I just can't get it out of my head. And here I am, it's Tuesday, and it's like I'm like multiple days past the deadline that us as a group set for myself. And finally I was like, today's the day. And I put my headphones in and I'm like, and I dumped it out and I got it done, and it took me 3 hours, but it looked.
So I should expect a presentation in my email to like look over.
No, this isn't yours. Oh, for you to look at? No, no, but I thought of that as I wrapped up. I was like, because we've all done separate ones. I'm like, we're going to be doing another event. And I'm like, they should all look the same.
Yeah. You know, I was like, lead presentation designer.
I know. Well,
I hate doing that.
You want me to send it to you and be like, hey, I need this.
I'll show you my screen.
I need this today.
I tell you why. One of the reasons why I don't mind doing stuff for certain people that I dislike doing for others. This being like an example is because I know that the trust there will allow me to have enough creative control to do something cool with it and still have it be on brand, still have it be of value to you. And at the end of the day, it's not like this generic corporate, but like, what do the transitions look like? You know what I mean? Type of PowerPoint thing.
All right, I'll send it to you.
That, like, it's still like a super high level design. I mean, you're paying me, right?
Well, very true.
But yeah, it's interesting, like how much time you're thinking about something versus how much time you're actually sitting down. I mean, obviously you can only build something so fast, right? But I mean, I've had 2 carpal tunnel surgeries in both hands and ulnar nerve surgery at this point. Like, my hands are fucking garbage. I could still design relatively quick, but there's times where, like I said,
that's
I
from
can
what?
do material.
What is that from?
285 shows a year for 4 years straight.
And did you play guitar?
Like,
yeah.
That, and then just in general, the majority of my 20s not taking care of my body at all, But I can still do that stuff quickly, but then there's times where I don't get it right off the bat.
That's the thing. It's like
I've
that.
got Justin, who's this other designer that works at Slash, and he's incredible, man. That dude came in with a portfolio of like ballpoint pen, like sketches of like noses that had legs growing out of it and like basketball shoes on them. Like, the craziest, I mean, super cool, but like, that's not a logo. What am I supposed to do with this? And like now, man, like not only can he crush branding, but he's doing like super elevated illustrations for like retail and things like that. And I love working with Justin because I can basically be like, hey man, here's the strategy that Hunter did. Here's my mood board. And then I know that in a week or 2 weeks, what I'm going to see from him is baller. And I don't worry about it. I don't have to micromanage it. I don't have to ask halfway through, like, hey, where is it? Sometimes, dude, I don't see it until the day that we're pitching it to the client. And I don't give a shit, because if that's what he wanted to pitch, I trust him. Would I have made different decisions? Possibly, And when we collaborate together, like, I'll design, hey, you go on your like away and you design, and I'll do my designs, and let's like bring them together and see what happens. Like, we inspire each other. You build off of that idea and build off of that idea and build off of that idea, and then the end result's like always baller.
What thinking about our audience and the most who listen to this are in our trade. Mm-hmm. And earlier on, you said you really like working with people in this trade. So, I think you've worked with quite a bit of them. But thinking about, like, let's just say someone has no experience. This is me 8 years ago reaching out to you. Hey, I want a website and a brand. What does that process typically look like for you? And what are some of the toughest things that you've experienced, and how have you kind of come back from that?
I would say the toughest thing that I've experienced is it's something that Tyler mentioned before, where people think that your logo is supposed to describe the services of your company, right? So there's often like, hey, we want like a cross hammer and a cross this, and then like there's the shape of a house in there or something like that, you know what I mean? And then we're, our last name starts with M, so like make that, and then we have a tagline, and then also like it has to say comma LLC in it, and then can you put our website and our phone number? I'm like, dude, that's not a fucking logo, that's a billboard. I think that it's the process starts with education, right? Because that's also a way that you can build trust. And I know it's something that's super important to you guys. When you explain to someone your process and you're telling them, like, these are the steps, but also when I say word mark, this is what I mean. When I say logo mark, this is what I mean. When I talk about typography or, headers and subheaders and body copy, these are the things that I mean. So, our process starts with education, but similar to you guys, like, it's listening. I'm going to ask you a million questions about your brand that you may have never thought of. And I might come back next week and ask you the same questions now that you've had time to think about it and see if you answer it any differently. And then we'll put together just a document that outlines like, this is who you are. This is how you communicate that externally. And these are your core like values of your brand and who you want to portray yourself as. You know, from there it's easy. Here's a mood board. Here's your logo. Like, here's your website. Do you have, well, the biggest difficulty in the entire process is content gathering for websites. It's, where's your photos? Where's, like, what words do you want on it? What pages? And people are like, oh, just build me a website. Like, just with
and
what?
Organized content too. Like, that's something even
Organized.
You know, that
yes.
I remember, like, I'm notorious for blowing Drew off on a meeting, but he's like, I need photos. I'm like, here's my Dropbox link, and there's literally like 95.
It's the same Dropbox link that you sent me
There's
every other month for the last 5
95,000
years.
photos in it, and that's like no exaggeration. And then you guys finish the website. I'm like, oh, I hate those photos.
Yep.
And they're like, dude, like,
Yeah.
we picked what we picked a couple. Like, you can replace them with whatever you want. I'm like, I know, I just gotta think about it.
You learn from that though. At this point, not just with you guys, it's just like, hey, look, just pick one photo and use it everywhere. And then when they look at it, they're like, why are you using the same photo? Because you didn't tell me which photo you wanted. Just go through and tell me exactly what photo you want, and I'll plug it in. It's literally, that is like copying and pasting a word in a Word document.
That's actually a great
That's
idea,
how fast
because
I can do it.
There's photos on my website that I don't love, but it works. Where it's like, if they were the same photo everywhere, I wouldn't have let you put my website live.
No, you wouldn't be able to stand it. Well, I used to use, when I first started doing web design, I dealt with this so much because all I was doing was web design. And so I would build like your kind of typical layouts of like, this is an about section. This is what it looks like when it's to the right of a picture that's on the same line as it is, and this, that, and the other. But I got no words, and I'm not going to just like make shit up because that's just unnecessary. So I started looking into lorem ipsum generators, and my favorite one is Slipsum, and it's a Samuel L. Jackson generator, and it's literally just quotes from Samuel L. Jackson movies. And you could say, I want 2 paragraphs, I want 3 paragraphs, I need a header, a subheader, and 2 paragraphs. And it's like, listen up, motherfuckers. There's a motherfucking snake on this fucking plane. Like, dude, it's baller. And so when you send somebody
amazing.
that, they're like, what is this? And I'm like, you didn't give me copy. I need you to go fill that in. You know what I mean? But they don't forget that experience. You know what I mean? So like the designs, to Tyler's point, like the design is great. That experience is unique. And the trust is already there because you've educated somebody. And now it's on you. It was like accountability goes both ways in what we do. Us, you guys, everybody. Anytime, like hey, if you need this by May 1st, and I've sent it to you on April 1st, and you wait until April 27th to get me a revision that you want to have on it, like, that's on you, man. I can't turn that around that quick sometimes. You know,
it's funny.
How hard is it to convince people that like one of the most important things is just for something to look good, where like it's not trying to put too much emphasis on the meaning and like how special it is, where it's like, I need like my kid's initials are like in the background of this, where it's like, at the end of the day, like, if nothing else, this has to look good. It has to be pleasing to the eye.
I think it's very difficult, especially if, I've worked with a few people in the past where, I'll show something, it's great. They're like, dude, this is killer. Why is this word here and not at the bottom or somewhere else? I'm like, at some point, I just say, I chalk this up to designer's intuition. Like, rounding corners on typography, choosing colors and color psychology and shit like that. I can back that up with strategy.
Yeah.
But at some point, it was my designer intuition, and you chose to trust me to position you for success because you believe in my designer's intuition. Otherwise, you wouldn't have hired me for the job. So that's why, and if that doesn't work, then we can fire the client.
I think that would be such a difficult part of your job, where like people are coming to you with their brand, with maybe it's a new company, maybe it's a rebrand, and like they're putting everything into this, and there's that sentimental and emotional aspect of it where it's almost better to shut that off some, where it's like, listen, like this is the face of your brand, this is what everyone is going to see, this is like first interaction, and it has to present itself a certain way, and like, you know, nobody cares that you have 3 kids, or like, where it's like that, just it needs to stay out of it. And I think that's like walking that fine line where you're not being rude to people, hurting their feelings, and still being able to kind of get the design out the door that you want would be a tough, difficult to navigate.
Yeah, it is. I'm very transparent and honest, and we try to set that standard from the very beginning, because I also think that that's one of the important ways to build trust. And in doing so, like I've gotten really good at having difficult conversations with clients. Now, I might be terrible at having difficult conversations like with my team internally, because I'm a people pleaser that way, because like I'm protective of them. But with clients, it's like, if I were to just go along with you saying, oh, this is what I like, I don't like what you did, or whatever, or I have 3 kids, so I want 3 stars in my logo or something like that, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't tell you that this was a bad idea. But I'll also back it up with, I'm not designing this logo for you.
Yeah.
I'm not designing this logo for people like you. I'm designing this logo for the demographic who is interested and will pay for the services or products that your brand makes or sells. And if you can't see past that, then everything else that we do is not going to work.
Yeah. I mean, the other aspect of that, which has always been a gripe for me, is at the end of the day, your name is on that. So like if you're not established enough where you just kind of have to take what you can get, and you can't really put your foot down and say, hey, this is what we do, and now you're putting junk out the door that your name is on, it's like, what the hell was that last project I saw you put out? Like, that's not like you. And at the end of the day, selfishly, like, I want to build stuff that I'm proud of, not just because like you have this crazy idea.
I think that it's 100% okay that as a builder or a designer or any kind of creative to say no to those things, right? Like saying, we all know, we've heard it. There's our 4th buzzword is like the power of no. Because one, like, yeah, your name's on it, but like we can design some stuff and just never put it in a portfolio or post it to Instagram or whatever, and deny any involvement in it. If someone's like, hey, did you guys do that work? The guy who owns that company said you did. Like, dude, I don't know that dude. Does that look like my work? But also like sticking to your guns. Like we are in the middle of an intensive like brand strategy repositioning for ourselves. It's been going on for 2.5 years because the cobbler's kids never have new shoes. But we pivoted from this like we create because we give a damn concept to this not good enough concept. And it's really like, we're not good enough. And what I mean by that is, we're not the people that you go to if you're willing to settle for shit that's just good enough.
Right.
Because that does not create value, right? That's just the center everything, align everything. That's the super clean, good, but forgettable everywhere stuff, right? We're the people that you come to if you want something that's going to be explosive and exciting and unique and different. And, there's this term that Hunter taught me. It's enclothed cognition, which is the idea that of feeling confidence when you're wearing something that has like a logo on it, right? Like Harley Davidson, 98% of the people that wear a Harley Davidson shirt don't and will never own a Harley Davidson.
Interesting.
But they identify as part of the Harley Davidson brand tribe, like tribalism.
What about a Harley Davidson do-rag?
Yeah, well, I think that 90%. Yeah, I think it switches there. Is my do-rag on the other table somewhere over there? No. But it's just a really interesting notion that like you have to still feel confident in your brand, right? Because you still have to go and execute this strategy. You still have to go, like, so many people forget. I think that's another one of those like very difficult things, Nick, is I have a lot of people who see, like, Hate Brand Goods is one of my oldest, closest friends. He's a 3-time world champion in the Highland Games. He's, you know, a tattooed monster that used to wear skirts and throw telephone poles. And he's part of that CBGB's in New York story, and one of the reasons why it's so fucking nuts. But he's just this big personality, right? And he put himself out there, and he started creating content and talking to people and sharing his experience and helping people with, like, training of, like, picking up super heavy stuff. And more people, like, latched onto that. And he was, like, selling parts for chemical plant hardware, and now he is selling t-shirts for a living, right? But, like, I can only position you with so much. You still have to go out there and put the work in and do your part, you know? And it's not easy. It's not for everybody. I have a lot of folks that will come to me because of that brand and say, hey, I want to start a t-shirt brand. I'm like, dude, I can crush t-shirt designs for you. I can make a badass website. I can connect e-commerce to it. I can help you through all of that. I can set you up for success. But you still have to go out and market that and build the content and make the relationships and eat, sleep, breathe, live that shit. Because if you're not, you're never going to be Hate Brand Goods. You know what I mean? And you also can't compare your year 1 to their year 9, right? But I can only position you for success so much. You still have to go put in the
Let me ask you a
Yeah, that's
Good.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, let me ask you a question, because I've been following his brand since you introduced it to me, and I think his stuff's awesome. He is a monster. You know, I keep wanting to buy the Not Dead Yet hat, and I just haven't. But I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't realize that it was called Hate.
Yeah. No, a lot of people don't.
So here's my question. Is that good?
Yeah, totally. Because now that you know, you've had your own aha moment, and you'll never forget that. And if you go and you look up, like, his ethos, and you read that it's, like, about this healthy hate of the old you, right? You from yesterday should be motivation to be a better you today, right? And so it's hate, but, like, in this positive spin. And then, you know, he does the Roman numeral 8 with the H, which is also extremely fucking difficult to design anything that has 3 eyes, right?
Yeah, you know what? I've always thought it was HVLL. I don't know why. Like, and now I'm looking at it, it's HVIII.
No, man, there's certain things, like...
But you're right. It's like
to,
you answered that exactly how I hoped you did, because it's the same. I struggled with this with NS Builders. NS Builders was not a creative name. It just, NS was Nick Schiffer Builders, and I have time and time again considered changing my name, and finally got to a point where I felt as though I was too far along to do it, which is not a fair statement. I could change tomorrow and it would be fine. But when instead I tried to counteract that with, no, how about I just get everyone to understand what it is, and then there's no more questioning it. It's like, oh, NS Builders? Yeah, I know NS Builders. Because in the beginning it was, you know, M as in Mike? No. NS. Oh, NS, like ENNIS? I'm like, I don't know how you just went from M to Ennis, but no, N, like Nick. And they're like, oh, got it. Yeah. But now
but once they get it, they don't forget it.
You know
what
like
I mean?
You said, that aha moment. I'll look at this. I can't wait for me to come across one of his posts on Instagram and be like, now I know what that is. Yeah. Like, I'll buy the hat. Now I'm going to buy the hat, because I'm like, now I'm so excited about it.
There's so much power in that. And that goes back to, like, and I'm sure you guys do this. I'm sure, like, both of you follow, like, 50% of the people that you follow on, like, Instagram are other builders, and it's like accounts that are like, here's some other cool shit that other people are doing, right? And when you're early in your career, you're just like, you you're so into that you're just like, oh, look at this, and you're being inspired. And then you get to this point where you're like, you're grinding, you're working all day, every day. You might look at Instagram for 30 minutes to an hour, something like that. You got somebody helping. My wife runs all of our social media. You've got someone helping you do that stuff. And like, when you do get on it, you actually are just kind of scrolling mindlessly past some of that stuff. You're never really soaking it in until that one thing stops you dead in your tracks, whether it's that house in Spain or it's just something really simple. And you never forget those posts, right? And so when you're creating a brand, or you're creating a website, or you're creating a logo or content for somebody, you know, things like that, you have to take that in consideration. And, you know, that's one of the biggest challenges, is to create those aha moments, but also to give the brand that enclosed cognition, that confidence, and that excitement, sometimes even the courage to be ballsy enough to go with something that might not be immediately recognizable at first, or might be a little outside of the box, because it's scary. But more times than not, I've explained this to my team. I think there's two different risks when it comes to a brand. The risk of playing it safe and being lost amongst, you know, the rest of everybody else, and the risk of trying to do something unique, right? Like, at worst, it falls flat and you're exactly where you were. At best, you're the most memorable, recognizable, and distinguishable brand that you possibly could be, and you're fucking pumped and you're just excited, and there's something explosive and you know, cool about that. It's the perfect project for me is when, like, someone's like, oh man, I don't get it. What is that? And then I show it to them. And then 3 weeks later, like, I sat with it. I thought about it. It's actually fucking dope. Let's go. What's next? You know what I mean? Instead of like, oh, let me pitch it to you again. Let me explain to you some more why I think this is the best reason, you know, because they had their own moment with it. And it wasn't because I convinced them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also, how difficult is it to put out something that looks like everything else? You know, like, it can't be that hard if you can go on and say, you know, I want this font and take this from this person and that from that person. And it's just, I would rather go to somebody who has the artistic ability to take, you know, your inspiration or what you like and then make it their own and make it unique, because I think that's what's hard.
That totally.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's probably the same for what you guys do, right?
Oh yeah, it's, you know, I mean, you see it constantly. Designers are always calling each other out or calling out someone else that reposts even just a design. You know, I was following this thread a couple weeks ago, and they were posting like Home Depot photos. Like, look at this bathroom, they completely ripped off my design. And then you go and you compare it, and it's like, I mean, I guess it's the same. Like, yeah, it's a blue room with a white bed and this pillow and that, like, and I was having a hard, like, I wasn't going to argue it. Like, hey, like, if that's how they feel, like, then I'm all here for it. And it's the same thing when we do stuff. It's like, yeah, I mean, you straight up rip that off. Like, that was, you know, but that's what we're doing. We're sharing it anyway. Like, we're expecting it to be ripped off.
Right.
You know, it's funny. I get tagged or sent stuff once a week. Like, hey, look at this. This guy copied your brand, your logo, your website, and I share them with you most of the time. Like, hey, Drew, check out this website. And you know, I used to just call them. Be like, hey, so-and-so, I saw your website. And they'd be like, what? Like, oh, I haven't seen it yet. How's it look? I'm like, I was like, I remember that kid. He was like, I haven't even looked at it yet. I just hired someone and said I liked your website. I'm like, well, you blocked me on Instagram, and your website's a direct copy of mine. But, you know, more recently, I had someone send me something that was direct ripoff, and they were like, you going to say something? I'm like, no. I'm like, well, for what? I'm like, that. If anything, they look foolish. Like, they, you know, I spent the time building it, and they're ripping it off. They're copying it. You know, some of them are copying it word for word, text for text, font for font, and it's like, whatever. If those that don't know that they copied me, whatever. You know, they're not my people anyway.
That brand can only go so far, right? Like, they can never create longevity because at some point they have to either change that or
Or
You
be
know.
like, hey, why does that look
not
so...
if Nick keeps evolving,
telling
because
you.
then they could just keep
That's
tagging along
true.
with that.
It's true. You're about to tell me we're going to need a new website for 2023.
Well,
right?
I think,
Super smart.
remember the Modern Craftsman? Remember some flooring company, which we get sent all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, dude. I thought about that like 2 days ago. I think about that often, and it's because like I'm at ProSource, I'm at
Dude,
Lumber
they're
Liquidators,
still
I'm at
out
Home
there.
Depot, and I'm like looking at shit, and I'm like, I just hope to like walk into one of these places.
It's
and
like
run into
Midwest
that shit.
floor stores, and like I think a lot of their like a lot of their stickers in store is still the one that we told.
Oh, 100%.
Told them to cease and
That
desist.
dude sent us an email with like, "Hey, we sort of changed it," and we were like, "Fuck it, dude.
Yeah.
I'm tired of like doing."
And it was
this.
just like,
And
you know
they're
what, like,
"God, we're not changing
whatever.
it."
Like people are gonna see that and then hear the podcast, or they already know about the podcast.
Oh, you guys
Yeah.
have a floor brand?
Yeah.
It's like we
Think
should
about
you know
that
what?
aha moment, right?
We should have negotiated royalties on that flooring.
I'm telling you, man, we could have been like, dude, we need 50 G's or pull that shit, because it's either going to cost
know.
you that much to repackage all this stuff.
I was in
Or,
a really good mood
you
that
know,
day, Drew.
Yeah, but we could have had a
We
boat.
could have had a
man.
boat.
Same.
I look at more
Could
expensive
have went
boats
back
than
on
that.
the road and started the band back up.
Oh, dude, I'm so fucking old now. Like, just the idea of like, man, I need 3 different pillows strategically positioned, or else like I wake up and I can't stand up straight.
No one let's full circle with this podcast. No one prepares you for taxes, but also no one prepares you that sleep ends up hurting.
Hurting.
Like you
Or children.
Well, yeah.
Like children are exhausting.
You just had a child. Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think bringing children into the world is one of the most barbaric and effed up things there is in life, and for so many reasons. But let's just talk about the fact that after whatever you go to sleep, they don't tell you what to do with the baby. So if you have no experience, like you're just screwed. Or they offer to come in and take the baby to the nursery. It's like, well, that's not going to help me tomorrow when I'm home. And it's just like, all right, you guys are good. Everyone's healthy. Good luck.
How about when we got a dog and I bought books on like how to train the puppy, and my wife was like, yo, we just had 2 kids and like you never
Didn't
even
read
thought
a
of getting a
single
book.
book.
And I was like, kind of fair.
Yeah, my how to be a dad books are like in a closet. I might have read like a chapter. And
What was that
man, I'm
movie?
pretty good at
Just
winging
knocked
shit.
up, knocked up, or whatever.
Yeah,
When she was like, "You didn't read the books."
Yeah.
yeah, so good. What a great movie.
But it's true though. It's like you prep yourself to have a fucking dog.
Yeah.
But it's like, I'm not going to prep myself. I prep myself for everything. Like no matter what it is, especially when you've never done it before. It's like, oh, you're going to do this. I'm on like YouTube looking at it. You know, I don't want to lace these shoes up wrong. How do you break in a softball glove for my daughter? I'm on like YouTube trying to check it out. But it's like, now, Rach, you know what? You can push a child out of your vagina. I'm just going to like show up and, you know, I'll be there to catch it and we'll figure it out.
Man. Yeah,
It's insane.
Whatever.
It's bizarre.
Dude, the worst part is like, my son made 6 months like a week ago, and we had one of those little bouncy like things
For the
that you can
door-
put in
for
the
the door to-
doorway.
yeah.
Dude, I fucking love that thing. It's hilarious. He thinks it's the best, and it's loud as shit too.
Oh
Right?
yeah.
But like, I'm standing in front of him. This is like this morning. I'm standing in front of him, and I'm like bouncing up and down with him. And at some point, my knee just goes pop, and I mean, it was almost like as if I'd shit myself or something. I was like, oh, this is not good. Like, I'm barely moving.
You're bopping.
You know what I mean? Well, I have stepkids. They started playing soccer this past like in the winter. First time ever going out to the park to like kick the ball with them. I tore my plantar fascia, and I have not been able to drive or walk or anything for 4 months now.
Oh,
It's terrible.
Jeez.
It's terrible, dude.
I think you gotta.
I'm like, dude, what
you gotta
happened?
stretch or
I used to
something.
drink so much and put so much shit in my nose and everywhere else, and I could get on stage and jump up and down for an hour and a half and not feel a thing.
Because you
right?
stopped.
Yep.
That's what happens.
Telling you, man.
Jeez.
As soon as you stop, you can't start back up again.
I think my body is like appreciate the like no more of that stuff, but also I'm pretty sure you're dying still. You know,
you're just like delaying the feeling until now.
Yeah, exactly. Paying for it in spades.
Drew, I think we're gonna have to talk about a rebrand for the Modern Craftsman or something. I'm inspired.
Cool. Sounds good. I was working on the website today.
Sweet.
I thought you already had that in motion.
Well, we did.
Nick.
I'm just announcing it.
Yeah. Sounds good to me.
Cool.
This was fucking rad, dude.
Drew, you're the man. I appreciate it.
Y'all do this all the time, man? Just like
That's
hang out
it.
and talk to cool people? I know y'all talked to, was it Roxy or Phoebe from
Dude,
Pander?
I had their book right here. Both of them. They were on.
Yeah?
They were both on. They were awesome. She's having a baby too.
Is she?
Pretty sure.
I haven't kept up with them. They came and did our design conference maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and I booked them to do a mural for my friend's salon downtown.
That's sick.
And it's
Dude,
rad.
they're
really
funny.
cool.
Like they're all
Dude, they hustle.
yeah, and
man.
they're all over TikTok too, and they're hitting like the trendy stuff, but they're constantly calling out people like, yeah, just talk to that client. That one's not gonna pay. And it's just like straight up like you either pay me,
I love it,
or
man.
and I'm not working for you. And
I love it,
They're
dude.
badasses, man.
I don't have the energy to hustle like them anymore. But
yeah. Well, I think she was.
I
think I saw the other day. She's like, so when you're pregnant, you don't paint as much, and you just have them do it. So she's got people painting for her. But yeah, dude, this is it. We just chat. I'm stoked you were on. And I'm stoked that we had a cool conversation, and I didn't have to pay for this one.
Yeah, right. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for your time, man. It was awesome.
Drew, I'm going to
Likewise.
let everyone know what your website is, because I think that's just as cool as you. What's your URL?
You can check us out at /.wtf.
That's it. Love it, man.
It's amazing.
That's it.
Cool, man. We'll chat soon. I think we have a meeting next week.
Yep.
All right,
to you then.
later.
Appreciate your time.
See you, Tyler. See you, Nick.
He's a cool dude. Dude, I had no idea that I knew he was a musician, but I didn't know he was a musician to that level.
Yeah, I can't wait to get off the podcast.
And listen.
I'm gonna put on the album.
Oh yeah, my ride home, definitely listening to it. But all right, what do we got? We have anyone that has submitted for some swag? I think we got out. Tyler, you were saying the last one that we had.
Yeah.
It was a dad, right? What was his name?
Yeah, I think its handle was like South Coast
Dad,
or something
yeah.
like that.
Yep.
Was messaging me on Instagram and kind of showing me what he does. I guess he follows us because he does some home remodeling and stuff to his own house, but what he actually does for a living, and he's an aerospace engineer. I don't know.
Something beyond me.
Yeah, I mean, basically, he's like, yeah, I work with a bunch of contractors and subcontractors, like building rockets and testing.
Yeah,
them.
so if you guys want to hear about that, post on your story, tag us, and let us know that you want to hear about rockets. And if you don't, I'm going to be posting for you because I want to hear about rockets.
And like my list of things to do was message him, be like, can you have a conversation? Because he's like, yeah, man, I'll get on the podcast. Like, but that'd be interesting. He sent me like some links to what they're doing, and it's pretty insane.
That's dope. Well, we do have a Brian Sherlin, at Brian Sherlin, so we'll have to DM him, Tyler, for some swag. But he wrote in and dropped us a review. These guys are hilarious and knowledgeable, and I'm always learning to improve my work inside and out of the field. These guys are always A1 as well. By the way, Chuck Taylor lows are better than highs. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh my god.
He wrote highs are better than lows. I disagree with him, and I'm not buying. You know what? I was going to get high tops, and I think I might avoid getting high tops because of the hate that I'm getting here.
You can.
I'm going to.
You should get the super high ones that go up to like your knee.
Those are
Ever seen them?
those are for women.
It's all right. They're all unisex,
well, I
man.
guess, over my jeans.
Nah, still go
Oh, okay.
under. Just better ankle support. And in shorts.
Oh yes.
They're gonna look nice.
Little
in
5-inch
shorts in the
inseam with
summertime.
knee-high boots. I will be the talk of the town.
Oh man.
Well, big thanks to our sponsors, Duration Millwork, as well as Rent-A-Run, Rockwool, and Upstate Merch.